The date is January 9th, 2024, and Hoyoverse releases their first 4-star Pyro character in over 2 years. That 4-star would of course be Chevreuse, and to everyone's surprise, she would become one of the most relevant 4-stars to date even at C0. At first, people thought she would revive the overload reaction like Nilo revived the Bloom reaction, but that wasn't exactly the case. You see, as long as the team consists of only Pyro and Electro, Chevreuse's Ascension 1 passive allows any overload reaction to reduce the Pyro and Electro res of enemies by 40% for 6 seconds. What many people found out is that even though reducing the Pyro res of enemies does increase your overload damage, this passive actually finds its best use with Pyro and Electro carries that deal a ton of raw elemental damage. Chevreuse's Res Shred circumvents a lot of the issues that can be found with running an Anemo unit holding the 4-set Viridescent Veneer, which is another source of 40% Res Shred. In order for the 4-set Viridescent Veneer effect to activate, the holder must be on field, meaning an Anemo burst like Kazuha's will not refresh the 10-second debuff duration once Kazuha switches off field for the main DPS. For Chevreuse's teams, any overload reaction will refresh the 6-second debuff timer, meaning it's a lot easier to maintain for characters with longer rotations, and even for players who may end up swirling the wrong element with their Anemo characters, they won't have to worry about delicate setup with Chevreuse. Now, of course, this doesn't mean Chevreuse is a strict upgrade to Anemo characters, because the Pyro and Electro team restriction means you lose out on grouping from Anemo characters, Vaporize for your Pyro carries, and Aggravate for your Electro carries. Instead, Chevreuse serves as an easy alternative that can help free up your Anemo supports like Kazuha or Sucrose for another team. And to put the cherry on top, the rest of Chevreuse's kit creates a complete character at C0 that doesn't rely on constellations, which is not something you see often with newer 4-star characters. Her tap skill shoots her musket for AoE pyro damage and also provides continuous healing to the active character for 12 seconds. Chevreuse's hold skill allows her to aim her shot from her musket, and if the team triggers an overload reaction beforehand, this skill will be enhanced to deal more damage and buff the team's attack thanks to her Ascension 4 passive. The attack percent buff increases by 1% for every 1000 max HP Chevreuse has, up to 40% at 40,000 max HP. So instead of building her for damage, you should do your best to build her with full HP to maximize her buffing capabilities and her healing, which also scales with HP. Chevreuse's burst is very simple, with one large AoE hit to start and then a secondary wave of AoE damage afterwards. Both Chevreuse's skill and burst deal damage based on her attack rather than her HP, so don't expect her to deal much damage even with Constellations 2 and 4, which are purely for personal damage. The only constellation that really makes a difference for a supportive Chevreuse is her C6, which allows her to heal the whole party once 12 seconds after using her skill, and grant a stacking 20% Pyro and Electro damage bonus to any character that is healed by Chevreuse. The 20% Pyro and Electro damage bonus can stack up to 3 times, meaning your active character can get a 60% damage bonus after being healed by Chevreuse's continuous healing 3 times. That will usually take a little bit over 6 seconds of field time to max out, since her skill only heals once every 2 seconds. Nonetheless, this is a fantastic buff to pair with the attack percent buff and Res Shred debuff she already has in her kit at C0. To further enhance Chevreuse's support, her artifact sets strictly look to buff her teammates, since her personal damage isn't anything to be concerned about. The tried and true option for Chevreuse is the 4-set Noblesse Oblige, as it provides a 20% attack buff to the team after using her elemental burst. The set is super simple to use and has fairly good uptime, given that her burst only has a 15-second cooldown and a 60 energy cost. Another option you can choose is the new Notland support set 4-set Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. Even though Chevreuse misses out on a lot of the 4-set effect and only can grant the team 12% Pyro and Electro damage bonus for 15 seconds, it's still quite the decent option. In teams where you already have a large attack buff from a character like Bennett, this set can be just as good as Noblesse, or even better with an increase to the team's DPS by a couple percentage points. Other scenarios where it can be good is with a Pyro or Electro character that doesn't scale with attack at all. Currently, the closest thing we have to that scenario is Hu Tao, who still scales off attack but has a very low base attack and doesn't get much out of the 20% attack buff from Noblesse. The final set you can consider running on Chevreuse is the 4-set Song of Days Past, especially if you have C6. Without the extra healing from her C6, the set effect is typically just worse than her other options and really isn't worth chasing, since the buff is quite unreliable and Chevreuse's healing isn't that strong. For artifact stats, you're going to want triple HP percent in the Sands Goblet and Circlet. If you're running a 4-set Noblesse and want to burst every rotation, ER% in the Sands is a viable substitute since to burst every rotation, Chevreuse usually needs around 160 to 180% energy recharge depending on how much energy her teammates generate. If you can already hit 40,000 max HP without an HP% circlet to max out her attack percent buff, you can also choose to run a healing bonus circlet as well. For substats, your biggest priority is HP% and flat HP to max out her passive, and then the energy recharge and elemental mastery afterwards. I'm sure many players are delighted to hear that not only is Chevreuse not reliant on her constellations, but every single one of her weapon options are also extremely free-to-play friendly. Her best option is either the Favonius Lance or the Dialogues of the Desert Sages. If your teammates are energy hungry and can use the extra energy particles from Favonius Lance, then running this polearm is just another way that Chevreuse can support her teammates. The great thing about running Favonius Lance on a support like Chevreuse is that her substat focus isn't very strict, meaning she can easily run high crit rate substat pieces or a crit rate circlet without sacrificing much in terms of stat efficiency. If the team's energy isn't a big concern, then Dialogues of the Desert Sages is a selfish option for Chevreuse that has an HP% stat for increased healing and restores energy to herself whenever she heals a teammate. Unfortunately, this weapon was an event weapon released in patch 4.5, so if you weren't playing around that time, then Rightful Reward is a Fontaine craftable that is basically just a downgraded version. Rightful Reward's HP% stat is slightly lower and the energy refund is harder for Chevreuse to trigger since she either needs C6 or needs to stay on field to heal herself once for the passive, but overall this polearm is still a serviceable option. Players who don't feel the need to use Chevreuse's burst consistently can also just opt for the 3-star polearm Black Tassel, which grants a large HP% main stat but lacks any sort of energy generation passive like the other 3 options mentioned. Given that Chevreuse is a 2-in-1 damage support and healer, you can pretty much run her with any combination of pyro and electro units that you'd like. However, Overload is a finicky reaction with knockback against smaller enemies, and not every main DPS can afford to give up Hydro or Dendro teammates without losing a lot of DPS. So for this team section, I'll give you 3 team examples using the carries that appreciate Chevreuse the most if you don't know where to start. First up is Yoimiya, who might not be the best limited 5-star carry, but is a comfort character for many players since she has a great damage floor and is easy to play. Overload knockback is usually not a problem for her as her bow attacks have fantastic range, and she can afford to give up Vaporize reactions for Pyro Res Shred since not all of her hits will trigger Vaporize with her internal cooldown. For the other 2 characters, you usually want to run 2 off-field Electro characters between Fischl, Beidou, Yae Miko, and Raiden. If you don't have at least 2 of the 4 off-field Electro characters, Bennett, C4 Yanfei, and Thoma can be used for buffing in a triple Pyro single Electro setup as well. For the other Pyro carry that we're going to cover today, of course, it's going to be Arlecchino. This character is currently one of the best DPS characters in the game, both in terms of damage output and gameplay simplicity, so it's no surprise that Chevreuse fits nicely into her teams. Arlecchino is a normal attacking DPS like Yoimiya, meaning her off-field options are very similar and diversified. Running a double Electro setup with Arlecchino, Chevreuse, Beidou, and then either Fischl or Yae Miko is one of the best setups out there for overall team DPS. Because healing is useless for Arlecchino, Beidou is especially a great teammate for her thanks to some resistance to interruption and damage reduction on her burst, and also a small shield via her C1. The only downside of Beidou is her reliance on the Electro Resonance to meet her high energy requirements, so if you're running a triple Pyro single Electro setup, it's best to stick to Arlecchino, Chevreuse, and either Fischl or Yae Miko for the core units. The last slot in this triple Pyro setup can use Bennett for maximum damage output, or a Pyro shielder like Thoma or C4 Yanfei. The only issue with Bennett is that Overload knockback is likely to push smaller enemies out of the range of Bennett's burst, which can be anywhere from a minor inconvenience to a major damage loss depending on how your battle plays out. As for Electro carries, most of them prefer Dendro teams for Aggravate. Characters like Cyno, Keqing, and Sethos lose a ton of DPS without a Dendro teammate, but if there is one Electro character that can appreciate Chevreuse's support, it's Clorinde. While there is an issue with juggling very small enemies due to Overload knockback when it comes to the Clorinde and Chevreuse pairing, overall I think the benefits outweigh this very situational issue. If you're knocking enemies backwards instead of vertically, or if you're not knocking back enemies at all, Clorinde's mobility during her skill is great for moving around without using stamina. As for the team synergy, Chevreuse' Res Shred is great in multi-target situations, and Clorinde can make full use of that Res Shred with piercing shots that can hit multiple enemies at once. While the damage ceiling of this team isn't as high as Clorinde's best Aggravate team, that team uses two highly contested limited 5-star characters with Furina and Nahida. Chevreuse teams are a cheap way to maintain a good portion of the power found in Clorinde's best Aggravate team at a much cheaper investment price. The two other teammates for Clorinde are usually one off-field Electro character and one Pyro support. The off-field Electro character is as always between Fischl, Beidou, and Yae Miko, but a C6 Kujo Sara can be used to sacrifice off-field damage for massive buffs to Clorinde's personal damage instead. The Pyro support needs to apply Pyro off-field for overload reactions to actually trigger, so options like Thoma, Deha, and Xiangling are very common in the final slot. There's other characters that can appreciate Chevreuse's support like Deha, Linny, or Raiden, but I believe the three teams we talked about today are the best options, and if you know how these teams are constructed, it should be pretty easy to build a team around any other unit that I didn't cover today. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this updated Chevreuse guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Chevreuse for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.